How MMI interview prep course can drastically increase your interview performance. Hey again, BeMo Nation. Welcome to another episode of our One Question podcast. My name is Ronza, and I'm joined with Meng, my colleague. Hi, Meng. Now, we have nothing to sell you, just pure strategies and tips so that everyone has equal access to education, of course. If you've never watched one of these before or listened to any of them before, they are completely unscripted. There's no fancy music or visual audio effects of that nature. It's pure content. So we have 10 minutes to tackle a new topic each week. And this week, it's how MMI interview prep course can drastically increase your interview performance. All right, the timer is on. All right, now first and foremost, there is so much to unfold here, Meng. So I'm going to try to make sure that we lay this out in a way that our students can truly understand every step of the way, just like our students here at BeMo would. So I think it's very important to let you know that when it comes to our video course, the first thing you need to know is really what to expect, the foundation of what the MMI is. So you're going to get that knowledge. You're going to be able to understand what's being assessed in the MMI, how you're being evaluated, what type of questions you're going to receive, and of course, how to approach every possible type of question that you might receive on the MMI. And then afterwards, how do you deliver it, right? You go through these, you learn all of this information, you conduct it. What do you anticipate? What do you get from the feedback? How is that going to help you? And how is that going to actually increase your interview performance on the day of your interview? So, Meng, first and foremost, when it comes to the MMI, what it is, what it's looking for, how to approach it. Can we just walk through that briefly?
The MMI stands for multiple mini interview, and it is one of the more intimidating formats that students could encounter, and it's very common. So chances are you will have to do an MMI at some point if you are applying to med school or other professional schools. And the way it works is there are multiple stations. Sometimes there are 5, sometimes there are 10, sometimes there are 12. And at each station, you are providing an answer to a different interviewer. You're given a little bit of time to think about your response, think about the question, and then you're asked to deliver the response to the interviewer. And you're timed, your response is timed. So students or interviewees will rotate through the stations until they're complete, and they can take, anywhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours, sometimes even a little bit longer. So it can be quite taxing as a form of interview. And Ronza, you mentioned earlier about, learning all of the information, learning the strategies. They can definitely get that from our video course. They can even read about those kinds of things on our blogs. They can see examples of questions and good responses online on our blogs and other websites as well. Even sometimes schools will provide some guidance and examples. But I think what's most important in terms of doing well on an MMI is, number one, to do realistic simulations. It's really not enough to just read about it and learn about the strategies. It's really, really quite critical to implement those strategies in realistic practice. And then once you've done that, it's even more valuable to get some objective expert feedback on how you're doing. Someone who has worked with students before, students who have succeeded, and someone who can, tell you what areas you're doing well on that you should continue to do and reinforce, and what areas you might need to improve on. And that might not be restricted to just the content and structure of your answers. Oftentimes it's extremely valuable to get feedback on other aspects, peripheral aspects of your presentation as well, such as the way you talk. Maybe you have a lot of filler words and you need to limit those. Sometimes you might have some body language that isn't appropriate for an interview setting, or that isn't the best for presenting yourself as a professional individual. So lots of feedback and doing lots of realistic simulations is what you should do to prepare and do well in your MMI. And that's exactly what you would get in an interview prep course. You get the combination of those two, and that's why it's so valuable for improving your interview performance.
I cannot agree more, Meg. I think it's, as important it is as to learn something, the application is just so critical. And then pausing to reevaluate. And one thing I always suggest to the students is also the homework, the exercises that you're given. So you're going to get lots of feedback. Everyone's different. When you're doing, your starting point, whether you've had an MMI before, this is the first one, or you're familiar with it, you're not familiar with it. The feedback will vary, and we do build on concepts in different areas, of course. So usually your first feedback, it's going to be comprehensive. We're building a lot of the foundation for MMI, especially if you're not familiar with it. We're going to focus on your strategy, and then it kind of builds from there. In terms of the exercises, I think this is so valuable for people to stop and evaluate what they need to work on, whether that is the filler words that you just mentioned about, whether that is, people tending to be a bit more judgmental in their approach. And sometimes, we need that objective input because we don't have an idea of how we're doing. A lot of times when I'm sitting down with students, the first thing I'll say is, how did you think you did? And they'll say, oh, I don't think I did that well. I said, okay, well, what don't you think that you did well on? So even just tackling and breaking down that area is going to be very beneficial, because what you think is well, what you think is poor is not exactly to your standards, but it could be actually a great performance. It could be great progression in how I've seen you develop. And I think that in itself is a very good transition for progressing, because we tend to be harsh critics. So you don't want to tamper your confidence in that regard. So I think it's very important to pause, work on the areas, but also acknowledge the little wins, right? And whether that's, I performed professionally today, I worked on this, I do need to work on MMI a bit more when it comes to scenario questions, and I have to work on being non-judgmental. That's great. That helps you progress because you can note down the areas you need to work on. And it doesn't seem, like you say, as taxing. It's not as overwhelming, because then you say, okay, for the next session, I'm going to work on being non-judgmental, and I'm going to work on reading policy questions. I was not familiar with it in the last 2 sessions, so I'm going to work on it. So that helps and builds, and those areas are very important. I always say the real work begins in between the sessions, the mocks, and the realistic simulations, because you really need to put that effort into improving and then bringing it and implementing it. So the feedback is very important, but the homework in between that, you're directed to work on is just as valuable to help you progress, but then also to make the whole process less intimidating, right? There's so much, and I think men can attest to this. When you go into that first MMI, there's so much, that first feedback simulation, when a student does it, there's so much we can probably give you in terms of feedback, and it's going to overwhelm you. But strategically, we focus on the main concepts, whether that's just the delivery and just the strategies. Briefly, the important strategies that you need to be aware of. And then from there, we build on it, right? When I start to see students really transform, and now they're just stellar at scenario questions, but maybe when it comes to their personal questions, they're a bit more rehearsed, and they need to slow that back, because also over practicing is not good, right? So they're a bit more rehearsed, or they're not smiling as much, they're fidgety. So now we can really get to some of those areas. So that's why we always say perfect practice makes perfect here. And an MMI interview prep course can definitely help you with that, because you're going to learn what are those good habits that you need to continuously work on, and remove any of the habits that you have that you assume is good or you assume is bad. We're going to help you with that, and we need to make sure we put that all into play. Meg, we have about a minute here. Any other additional advice or input in terms of interview prep course that our listeners or watchers, viewers should definitely make note of?
Yeah, I think one thing we've kind of been hinting at, but hasn't been said explicitly, is that this kind of prep allows you to kind of encourages you to start prepping early, essentially, because here at BeMo, we always encourage people to start building those habits maybe like at least a month before, but usually 2 months before is when we recommend people start their prep. And so it allows you to give yourself a lot more time to develop the kinds of skills that the experts are working on. Another cool thing is that you get to work with different experts, different interviewers. And so everyone's different personalities will bring out something different in the candidate, which is exactly what happens in an MMI, right? Over the 10 stations, you're going to see 10 different people. And so it's quite valuable to get different input from different experts so that you can get a well-rounded perspective on how you're doing.
Absolutely. There you have it. Whether you're retaking that MMI or it's your first time, there's a lot of value in having that interview prep course. That actually is time for us. That's perfect. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If you like this as much as we loved and enjoyed making it for you, go ahead and share it with a friend, subscribe, and so you don't miss a future episode. But of course, if you have any questions, do ask that in the comments section. Until then, see you next time.
Bye.